Hello, hello. Welcome to another edition of Ask the Author. Today I'm here with Martha Tettenborn. She is amazing and she has so much knowledge. Martha is a 35-year veteran registered dietitian, a low carb health coach, and she is a recent ovarian cancer survivor. She used nutritional strategies to dramatically reduce her side effects from chemotherapy, and Martha is on a mission to share this information with others facing chemo. And today we're going to talk about Martha's book, Hacking Chemo. Martha, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting to go live.
I know, right? I'll double check to make sure we're live. I think we are. I'm pretty sure it says we're live, but I'll double check. Um, but if you want to get in touch with Martha, you see her name at the bottom scrolling the whole time. And if you look on Amazon or if you Google her book, Hacking Chemo, you will find her. But we'll make sure she tells you at the end how to get in touch. And we are going to start with a very powerful quote that Martha has at the very beginning of her book. And I'm going to let her tell you about it. The quote is, "Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." So, Martha, tell us who said that and why you included it in your book.
Sure. Well, the quote is part of a statement or a poem or a message from Marianne Williamson. And when I was, it's always been something that has resonated with me, her poem. But when I was facing cancer and realizing that I was discovering these alternate approaches to cancer, it behooved me to want to share this information. I couldn't not. And so I wanted to include that as the first kind of message of what makes us impactful in each other's lives. So the poem, I'm just pulling it up here, is called Our Deepest Fear. And it starts with, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Because when you realize that you have the power, then you realize that you need to use it.
Yeah.
And that can be a fearful thing, right? So
Yeah.
powerlessness is not necessarily the hardest thing. Being able to use your power can produce anxiety.
Yeah. Of
And
course.
she says, it is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And then the next line, which is the one that really resonates with me as someone who has, always fought with the last 20 pounds and never been, cosmetically what society said I should be and all that stuff right from, the get-go, is that we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. Yeah. So, I mean,
So
powerful,
good.
powerful words. And I reached out to Marianne and said, may I use this in the front of my book? And she wrote back and said, yes. So,
Oh, that's fantastic. Well,
yeah.
I'm going to do a quick shout out. So, I'm early stages of my next book, and I'm dedicating it to a woman. I've only met her a few times, but she knows me. We're peers, colleagues. And she said to me, after knowing me for 2 hours, "Do you have any idea how powerful you are?" And that planted a seed that ended up changing the course of my life. That little seed, which I've told her since.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your cancer journey, which started with, you felt like you had an egg in your belly. And I've heard this, by the way, from other ovarian cancer survivors. Often they would be exercising or doing yoga and all of a sudden feel exactly what you described. So tell us when that was, and then just kind of the progression of it.
Yeah, sure. So, I actually found it while I was doing a plank,
There
which
you
is
go.
that exercise where you lay on the floor and then you hold yourself up on your elbows, and it's good for your core. And I had, I'm not much of an exerciser, I will admit. I like running, and that's probably about the only one that really turns my crank. So I had a message from a friend, a text message from one of my best, oldest friends, like childhood friends. And she had said, "So what are you up to on your plank?" Because she was training for a specific thing, and she knew that I was kind of inspired by that, and I was going to do some more exercise. And I kind of went, "Ooh, haven't done one of those in a little while." It was the middle of July. I was just in the house. So I got right off my couch and laid down on the living room carpet to see what I could do. Right. And the moment I laid on my belly, there was something there,
Mm.
and it had not been there before. It was immediate. And like I say, it felt like an egg, like I was laying on an egg or something. And it's like, what the heck is that? So, I kind of reached down and poked and prodded a little bit. And, really had no idea. So I just sat up, reached for my phone, and called my doctor and said, "There's something in my lower abdomen, and I don't know what it is. I need to come see you."
Okay, so I
And
was stopped there. So it's July.
this is
Uh,
July.
Martha lives in Canada, and I learned something about Canada. So, as she calls it, the Canadian summers. So, so explain why you should never get sick in Canada in the summer.
Well, there's advantages and disadvantages. In the winter, it can be hard to drive places,
Right.
but in the summer, I mean, I live in central Ontario, so about 3 hours north of Toronto, and it's cottage country, and it is gorgeous in the summer. And our summers are short and sweet. Usually the kids are out of school for about 9 weeks. And so everything happens sort of between Canada Day and Labor Day, July and August. And during that time, like the entire nation takes at least 2 weeks of holidays.
I
So
didn't know this. I have found it fascinating.
yeah, so like things like, professional conferences and everything, they all get jammed into the spring or the fall because you don't want anybody trying to travel in the winter. You don't want to plan stuff for them. And the summer is when everybody's on holidays. So if what I found was I got referred to a gynecologist, and she was on sabbatical, or not on sabbatical. She was on a holiday for a month, um, for the month of August. And that was the one in the group practice that I happened to get referred to. So I ended up meeting with a locum who was covering her for that time. And so it was 3 or 4, probably about 4 weeks after I found the cyst, that I finally met with the locum. And she said that, yes, I was going to have surgery. And so the first surgery date that this woman had, the gynecologist, was for the end of September. It was already full, so I was looking into sort of early to mid October as being the first day that she had surgery time booked, that I could get in for this, which was planned to be laparoscopic cyst removal. And in the end, she had a cancellation for the end of September, so I was in a couple of weeks earlier. But that's, I just kind of had to laugh, because like everything you try and do in the middle of summer, there's there's just a little bit less of everything. But
Yeah.
on the other
Yeah.
hand, I had chemo in the dead of winter and had to drive 3 hours to the cancer center every 3 weeks. So I mean,
Not so fun
winter
either.
has its challenges too.
Yeah. So what I do want to say though is that no one for a second thought this was cancer. Everybody thought you had a cyst, right? Even though it
Exactly.
continued to grow.
Yes, it did. When they found it, I mean, it right away, I got in with my local doc. She, by then, of course, I had done the Dr. Google thing and thought I had figured it out myself. But she sent me off for an emergency ultrasound, and that took another 5 days, but only because I had a prior commitment looking after my son. He was having dental surgery, so I put it off a couple of days. But the day I had the ultrasound, they called me back and said it is a large, very large ovarian cyst, about 15, 16 centimeters across. So that's
Oh my
about,
God.
4, 6 inches. Yeah,
I know, like I just kind of want to like just show everybody like that's a lot. That's
yeah,
big.
yeah.
That's huge.
It was a
Wow.
good size, um, and it continued to grow. So by the time I had it removed, it was significantly larger. Like it had risen up above my my navel,
Oh
right? So I had
gosh.
to. It was like being early pregnantly, mid pregnancy. I had to, when I sat down, I had to take the waistband of my pants and pull it up above the bump, right? Um, and it was just a very simple fluid filled cyst. There was no characteristics that would make people think it was cancer. Plus, they did a blood marker. Um, Ovarian cancer has a blood marker called
Right.
CA125.
Yep.
And so they did that blood test and it came back just above the normal range, like by a couple of notches. Nothing like what some people get.
Right.
Normal is 0 to 36. Mine was 42, and it's not a great test. There are confounding factors. And a
Sure.
lot of people, when they're diagnosed, have like 100 or 5,000. You see all kinds of crazy numbers. So the local gynecologists all said, if I thought this was cancer, I would not be operating on you. Like, just understand that this is likely just a big cyst. And so I chose to have it done laparoscopically. I mean, I'm like pretty much a surgery virgin, right?
I
I've
was
managed to,
surprised by that, by the way. I was impressed,
I've made
actually.
it 58 years with nothing except having my tonsils out,
That
basically.
yeah, yeah. I think I wrote in the notes, in your Kindle book, I wrote, "Yeah, I wish." But so many things removed. I wanna talk about something you said that I think, even though you're in Canada and I'm here in the US, that I think a lot of people can relate to, and I love the way you put it about how everyone just looked at, once you got in the system, they figured out it was cancer and you were on this regimen and this sort of schedule. You talk about how people just look at wristbands and don't look you in the eyes. Why do you think that is?
Well, particularly the nurses in the chemo clinic, not the doctors, and not the like the doctor's nurse, the one that's actually sitting down and having a face to face with you at clinic, but in the chemo suite, there there are so many scared, anxious, needy people,
Sure.
and the nurses just they have to protect themselves, right? And I get that, but as that scared needy person in the chemo chair or the chemo bed, I wanted them to look at me and like see me, look me in the eye before they checked my wristband to make sure I was the right person. But a lot of times they didn't, and I mean I get why, but as the patient I under I needed them to be to kind of to connect with me on a more personal level.
I don't
Um,
get why. I understand protecting yourself, but I don't understand why you can't at least be human and look someone in the eyes. I don't.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying they never did, but some of them, you just try and make light conversation, and they were just kind of like, and
Right.
do their job.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of them are jaded, some of them are tired. Who knows what everybody is carrying in their own life,
That's
right?
true.
You
That's true.
can't judge based on that, but
But
I really
yeah.
noticed it that I kind of became a number to some degree
Mm.
in the system, and that was having been the person on the other side, and of course, as a dietitian, you sit down and you do look people in the eye and you ask them the important questions, and you listen to their answers. And I've never been in a position where I had to administer a treatment that was not involving teaching and talking. So
Yeah.
I didn't get it. And at
Right.
first I found it disconcerting, but I do
Right.
understand that, as caregivers, they have to they can't pour their heart into other people because Lord knows they probably see 30 or 40 people per day in that clinic, right?
I
It's
know,
a
but
lot
I think
more
you're
to
being
train.
too nice, I gotta tell you. I think you're being too nice. I don't think there's anything. I do believe you have to protect yourself, but I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at someone in the eye. I think that's sort of the least you can do.
Yeah.
And that is part of your profession. It was a choice that you made. If you don't wanna be an oncology nurse, you can go into another type of nursing. God knows nurses are needed, but, um, so I wanna just remind people, if you're watching live, if you're watching the replay, which happens a lot, And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. And please, if you're doing this on LinkedIn, please tag me, tag Martha, and that way we will see the comments. Otherwise, we will have no idea that you made a comment a week from now. So please put that in the comments. I also want to talk about something else just very quickly, just because I love the way you said it. And you talk about how there's the cut, burn, and poison of cancer treatment. And I've just never heard it said that way, the surgery, the radiation, the chemotherapy. And you made a very good point about immunotherapy. And we have Raj. Raj, hello. Raj says, we'll show it. He says, great conversation, my friend. Thank you so much, Raj. Please let us know if you have any questions. So I just love the way you said this, and that you acknowledge that there's still a lot to learn from immunotherapy. And then I want to go into something that's near and dear to my heart, as I said before we went live, that not enough people talk about, that you were very aware of having this support system, but also this need to support your support system. And you made this very, very astute observation that people distance themselves, they fade away, or they retreat to await the return of the real you. So could you tell us a little bit about that? And were there any friends who retreated and never came back?
Yeah, so one of the things that I discovered when finding out that I had cancer was that, there are people that you have to tell face to face. You can't,
Yes,
um,
I agree.
you can't tell them in an email. You can't tell them in a phone call. You really have to tell them face to face. Family and your closest friends and your boss, like people like that. And when you tell people face to face, they react, and you have to absorb that emotional reaction of theirs. It might be like an oh my god, or they might get mad or
Or
whatever.
so
But
and so I know had cancer and died, right? Everyone,
yeah, yeah,
everyone
yeah,
says
yeah.
that.
No, I didn't have too much of that, but
Good.
but just they're devastated by your diagnosis,
Yeah.
and I found myself in the position of going, but it's stage one, like, it's okay. I'm,
You're
I'm
making
still
them feel
good,
better.
right?
You were making them
And
feel better.
pardon.
You were making them feel better.
I'm making them feel better. That's right. So I'm having to absorb that emotional energy of theirs and reassure them, right? But then what I also found was that there, like I say, there were some people who, when you told them, they just weren't really able to deal with it and they never kind of reached out. And then other people who I would have thought were totally on the periphery of my life, acquaintances and coworkers that I don't work directly with and stuff, who would make an effort to come forward and say, wish you well. And if there's anything I can do. And like, it was stunning.
That's
I
great.
work in a long-term care facility with 100 beds. So it's a good sized building. And I'm the dietitian, the contract dietitian. So I've been there for a lot of years, but I'm not an employee. I don't go down to the lunchroom with everybody. So I put a note I just wrote them a letter and put it on the fridge door and said, like, I'm going, this is what has happened to me. I'm going to be going through chemo in the next few months. My days will be erratic, but I am going to be here. I'm, probably not going to look the same. And I was bald for 4 months. So I wore a hat at work. I'm not a wig person. So I wear a toque, it was winter. So I wore a toque all winter. And like, you guys are great coworkers and I appreciate you. And it was just that kind of a letter. And I had people that were totally like different departments, people I knew from just saying hi in the hall, that came by my office and, said, I read your letter. I wish you well, that kind of stuff. So it was kind of interesting who was not able to deal with my
Isn't it
diagnosis and
so
who,
interesting?
came up out of nowhere to
Yeah.
support me. But I realized that it's not a failing on their part, because everybody comes at something like this from a different place. Some of them have lost somebody to cancer. Some of them have had cancer themselves. The ones who've had cancer themselves, they'll come forward. Usually they're the ones who go and like, been there, done that. I'm with you, sister. And then there's other people who might have lost a as you, like a sibling or a parent or something, and it just hurts too much. And so they just can't, they, or the relationship with me is such that it hurts too much. And
Right.
so they just have to kind of pull back. Um,
I
and
just don't feel like that's an excuse though, right? Because and this is just me, I feel like you find out who your friends are when shit hits the fan. And if you get a cancer diagnosis, I would say that's shit hitting the fan. And those people who can't deal for whatever reason, doesn't mean it's personal, of course, but for whatever reason, um, especially when you think they're the ones that can, it's really heartbreaking, and
it's a little hard to absorb. And I'm not
it
saying
is.
I felt like that at the beginning when those things were happening, but over time, like if shit hit the fan, like my house burned down, somebody who can't necessarily deal with me going through illness would step up in a heartbeat and help with something that was a more physical trauma, or a more like a more not my own personal body sort of trauma, right?
Right.
So everything's different, but
You are so much nicer than me. Like, I've just I've just realized that. But I wanna share a joke, and then we're gonna talk about you, as a nutritionist, and, Raj said hi again, so I wanted to say hello to him. Um, but, I do wanna share this because it just to me, this cracks me up. So it's something like, what is the difference between a good friend and a great friend?
tell me.
Like, say, a good friend will bail you out of jail. A great friend will be in jail sitting beside you saying, "Damn, wasn't that fun?" I'm like, "Yeah, and actually, I call them my 2 a.m. friends. My 2 a.m. friends are those less in one hand, I can count them, but they are people that we can talk for a year, but I could show up at their house at 2 o'clock in the morning with a shovel and say, "I need some help here," and they would just go, "Okay," they wouldn't ask why there's a shovel, what's involved. Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
But let's transition into something that I thought was very fascinating about you, and I think people can learn from. You were a dietitian for 3 decades prior to your cancer diagnosis. And you have this great line, and this is the simple version of it. Nutrition was significant, but I pulled it up. So, as a dietitian prior to your cancer diagnosis, you said that you saw cancer. You said we, as in dietitians, saw cancer as an independent condition that we had to support people through. And it was strictly a reactionary approach, which I have found to be completely true in cancer care here in the US, even now, for the most part. Um, so, talk a little bit about how you went from that place to this proactive place that you're in now. And don't dive deep, we'll get into the actual nutrition, but tell us how you made that shift.
Well, I was already a bit of a renegade as far as the dietitian goes, um, because I had discovered the field of ancestral health and low carb metabolism and so on a few years ago, and I had done the Primal Health Coach Institute training to increase my knowledge around the whole
Interesting.
ancestral health, paleo, low carb. It was before keto was even really a 100% a thing. But so I was already someone who didn't just buy the party line of, low fat diets will solve everything. But yes, as a dietitian, all we were ever really taught was that you really needed to help the cancer patient to not lose weight
Right,
despite what they were going through.
right.
So you just used whatever helped, high fat, high
Calories.
sugar,
Yeah,
comfort foods, whatever they could get in so that they wouldn't lose weight, because we thought that losing weight was the biggest problem. And also, of course, there is what's called cancer cachexia, which is where
right,
you lose, your muscles waste and you become that skeletal sort of
right.
cachexic person. And that is life threatening. That
Yeah,
kills as many people as the
that's
cancer.
different. Yeah,
So, but we were never taught any difference between, kind of a healthy weight loss, particularly if you started the cancer process in an overweight body,
yeah. Fair.
and versus cachexia. And they are two very different things.
And
So,
so talk
so
about
yeah.
the low fat paradigm too. The well, hospital food just sucks for the most part. But talk about this low fat paradigm, because before we went live, we talked a little bit about how, if it was low fat, it was good.
Oh yeah.
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 So talk
The
about
US
that.
kind of you got, well,
You
cancer,
can blame
but
us. You can blame the
but
US.
no, there was a researcher in the US. If you listen to Nina Teicholz, and she explains the history of it in The Big Fat Surprise, her book. But basically in I think it was the 40s or early 50s, your president had a heart attack while in office, and he was literally out of his seat for like 9 or 10 days, and the country was just like, oh my God, right? And so heart disease had been increasing in prevalence, and this brought it to the forefront. There was a researcher named Ansel Keys who was a very charismatic man, and he believed with all of his heart and mind that fat was, and particularly saturated fat. Well, at that point, he was talking about all fat and cholesterol were what caused heart disease. And he was very convincing, and he fudged some of his data.
Yeah.
And he caused basically the entire field of science to look at low fat as being healthy. And so when the U.S. government put together a commission headed by McGovern, I don't remember his first name. It was called the McGovern Commission, and they looked at nutrition for health for North Americans, or for Americans. And in the early '80s, they came out with their recommendations, which was basically that everybody over the age of 2 should be on a low-fat diet.
So crazy.
And so, and there was all kinds of press, and basically most of the Western world then went on to adopt that. So the Canadian guidelines and the British guidelines, and the Australian guidelines, and all of Europe. And so we all went low fat. And when you take the fat out of your diet, you need to replace it with carbohydrates, because we all have a physiological sort of limit on how much protein we can eat.
Right.
So all these extra carbohydrates were starting to become more prevalent in our food supply, even more than they had been before. And the other thing was that saturated fat became the enemy, and cholesterol became the enemy. So then these plant fats that were being produced from agricultural products like corn and soy and canola, but particularly at that point, corn and soy, they're oils that are being produced in a factory using a whole lot of chemicals and chemical processes and high heats. And these were being touted as the healthy oils. So when you used a small amount of fat, you use these vegetable, they call them vegetable oils, but they're actually industrial seed oils.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I put that
So,
book you mentioned just because I never heard of it. I put it there, The Big Fat Surprise. That
oh,
talks
fabulous
about
book.
Okay, so that talks about what you're talking about. So I
Yes.
want to move into, because I thought this was very interesting, and I knew a little bit about it, but not very much, about when you talk about cancer is not a genetic disease, but a metabolic one. And I do want to say that there is this thing, especially in the South where I live now in the US, where everything must be inherited. Like everything, like it doesn't matter. You have migraines. Oh, your mom had migraines. Like it's the weirdest thing when the majority of things are not actually genetically inherited, including cancer. There are certain
Right.
cancers, sure, that have a genetic predisposition, but but it's in the minority. But I thought what this was even more powerful. So what do you mean when you say that cancer is a metabolic disease? Help
Okay.
us understand
So,
in layman's terms.
yeah, so a couple of terms. Genetics refers to the maps, the blueprints that are in your DNA, that's in every cell in your body. So that's the roadmap that your body uses to build everything about you. And yes, you get half of that material from your mom and half from your dad. And so there are things that are inherited that come down through your parents and the genetic material they contributed to make you.
Right.
But more recently, there's this field called epigenetics. And basically, what it is understanding is that you are not predestined to express all those genes and all those things. Your environment has a huge impact on
Huge.
how your body uses the genetic roadmap that you have built in. So
Yeah.
you might have a genetic predisposition to diabetes or a kind of cancer or something. But if your environment doesn't encourage your body to actually express those genes, then it won't happen. And so you're not destined to be, a repeat of what was in your history.
Yeah.
So the genetic material in cancer is damaged. We know that. Once Watson and Crick determined the double helix of DNA, this beautiful pattern of the individual cells and how that carries a message, then it became clear that when you looked at cancer cells, that material was damaged. There's problems with it, and all the science that had been done prior to that looked at the metabolism of cancer was just basically lost. Like, there was a man who won a Nobel Prize for describing
In the 30s, right?
in 31.
Yeah.
Otto Warburg. He was a German man. And there was all kinds of wonderful science being done in Germany on cancer through the 20s and 30s. And he was a big part of that. But all of that got lost. And the entire industry of cancer treatment just kind of shifted away from metabolism and into this genetic model,
Right.
what they call the somatic mutation theory. And metabolism just got left on the dust heap. Like, nobody thought about it for 40, 50 years until the late 90s, when some researchers started looking back at this stuff and realized that there was actually something else going on. And cancer uses energy in a different way, partly because of the damage that's inside the cancer cells, and partly because it's to the advantage of the cancer cell. But how you use energy and how you fuel those cells is metabolism, right? So metabolism is fueling, and fueling is about food and what you put in your body. And like, that's my shtick. That's where I live. It's, food, right?
So let me ask you a question that I didn't preface, so I apologize, that I find really fascinating, that you talk about in your book, that cancer cells love sugar. I have heard the exact opposite, and I would say it's pretty fair to say that you could find 50% agree, 50% don't. There are people who completely limit sugar. There are completely don't limit sugar, or limit it but don't eliminate it. Let's put it that way. So, why is there such a disagreement on whether sugar aids in cancer cell reproduction?
Probably lack of knowledge at this point, because the research is being done and it's very clear that that normal metabolism takes place in the mitochondria of the cell, which is like the little furnace that actually burns the energy, and it can burn sugar, can burn glucose, which is the blood version of your sugar.
Right.
It can burn fatty acids. It can burn ketone bodies. Like, it's a very multifactorial sort of system, very flexible. That's part of why we are such a successful species, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
But in the cancer cell, the mitochondria actually has damage inside it. Like, it's visible on electron microscope pictures, right? You can
Interesting.
see this beautiful architecture inside the mitochondria that holds the metabolic pathways is damaged. So in cancer, most of the metabolism happens in the cytoplasm, or in the fluid of the cell. And it's a whole different process. It's a very ancient process. It's called cellular fermentation. Okay. And so basically, a glucose molecule gets broken down by a single snap sort of thing, a single break that releases some energy. Not nearly as much energy as you get in the mitochondria, but it's very fast acting energy. And it's not a clean burning processes either, because in the mitochondria, you only produce water and carbon dioxide, and you breathe out the carbon dioxide and your body handles the water. In cellular fermentation, you get lactic acid as a side effect, and it's an acid. It's causes the cell has to shoot it out into its microenvironment, and that causes inflammation. So you get inflammation around these cancer sites. That's often this micro acidity, and the mitochondria produces 36 ATPs out of one glucose molecule, and
So I'm
the
going to jump ahead a little because I think you're getting to a lot of biochemistry
yes,
that
I
people
know.
might not
Right.
understand. Um, why do you think, and I'm talking about doctors, I'm talking about researchers and oncologists. So just your your opinion, we're not saying this is fact or whatever, but why do you think those people are so resistant to this connection between sugar and cancer cells?
It's not
What,
being taught. It's not being taught yet.
okay,
And the research is being done, because everything has to be evidence based, everything has to be proven,
sure.
right? So, people coming out of, well, number one, most doctors coming out of school get almost nothing in the way of nutrition.
Oh yeah, that's
That
absolutely true.
that connection between your mouth and how metabolic processes work.
Yeah,
They just
nothing.
don't get it. You'll be taught how a cell works, and how metabolism works, but putting that together with what actually goes in your mouth, they don't get it,
Yeah.
right? Nobody's
Okay.
getting it.
All
And
right.
it's not, it's literally in the last 20 years that this stuff has started to be understood again. So even 4 years ago when I started this process, there was almost nothing. There was hardly any books written. There was the one or two books about using keto for cancer, and using and metabolism of cancer. There's a
Okay.
researcher, Dr. Thomas Seyfried at Boston College, who was doing a lot of work. A woman named Miriam Kalamian wrote a book based on the stuff that he was researching that is much more user friendly, called Keto for Cancer. She came into it through her son having a brain tumor, and she
Okay.
found the work herself. So
Okay. So
they
let's
were
keep
almost
going.
the only ones 4 years ago. Now there's more.
Okay. I'm just thinking of like one doctor in particular who's very influential and cancer survivor and she's on Instagram and I'm just thinking about like this is one of her little bones to pick and that she does all these stories and everything. I'm thinking about her in particular, but I know there are others. But I do want to say one thing about genetics for people because you said such a great thing. You know, just because we get 50% of our DNA from the biological father and our biological mother doesn't mean you get that evenly distributed. So I think that's also a misconception because I did the whole ancestry and DNA. And between my two parents, there's English, there's Irish, there's Native American on both sides, both grandmothers, half Native American,
Okay,
and German and my mother is darker complected. So is my sister. Um, but I look very much like my dad's side of the family, and it was hilarious because my dad was like, "That must be wrong. Where's the German? Where's the?" And it's like, I didn't get that. I didn't get that. I am 35% Irish. I feel like my ancestry is super boring. 35% Irish, 64% English, and 1% African, which I think we may all have. I don't know. But that's what I got. So I didn't get any of that Native American on either side. I didn't get any of the German. So that's the other thing about genetics is that, it's not this even distribution either.
it's a bit of a crapshoot, really.
It really is, right? It is. Um, but I want to move on. One of the things you say that I love, love, love is you really talk about that, in our culture, and I think you mean kind of Western culture in general, eating is way more than just fueling the machine. But you point out that that's really all it was ever meant to be was fueling this machine, our amazing bodies. And I love that you talk about this. And you also talk about understanding the why of snacking and food addiction. No one wants to talk about this. I mean, this is a talk about a taboo subject. This is it right here. And I would love to know your thoughts on why. Why is this like the last final frontier of things we cannot talk about in society?
I don't know. Partly because there's a lot of money tied up in the food industry.
That's
um,
true.
and I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but again, you go back to, Nina Teicholz or Gary Fettke. There's Gary Taubes, the Good Calories, Bad Calories author. And you look at the history, the politics, the big business, the agricultural history, the pharmacological history of our Western culture, and so I'm
Yeah.
including everybody. Religion, like there are so many factors that go into what we choose to eat and the value that we put on what we choose to eat.
Yeah.
Okay,
I want to
so
share this with you real fast. Sorry to interrupt. So, hi, Dr. Dudley. Thank you so much. Glad to see a real metabolic dietitian nutritionist who isn't owned by the food industry and government. Thank you for your service and courage. He also added that he got 2 hours of nutrition lecture in 4 years of med school. Two
I hear you, Dr. Dudley.
hours. And then one more, I just, you really know the buzzwords and the real gold and the metabolic approach to cancer. Spread it far and wide, please. So let's make sure, Dr. Dudley, let's make sure you and Martha
Yeah,
Tettenborn connect after this. Thank you so much for your comments. Keep them coming. All right, so we will go back to what we were talking about here about the food addiction. I
yeah.
mean, just
So, I mean, we live in a food environment that is very toxic and that is controlled by all these things, by these belief systems and religions and food availability and the big money that's in agriculture and in pharmacological approaches
and
um,
body positivity, you and I talked
and
about.
yeah, and the whole the toxic diet culture and the body positivity movements and there's all kinds of factors that interact and influence how people make food decisions. And then there is the actual physical addiction that
Yes,
happens with,
totally
in
agree.
particular, sugar and ultra processed foods.
Yeah,
They actually can see on brain scans that your dopamine pleasure center fires off with sugar,
sure.
similar to how it does with cocaine,
Isn't
right?
that
Like you
crazy?
get a you
I
get a
believe it. I
buzz.
believe it.
Yeah. And so for people with addictive issues, that becomes a really hard thing to overcome. And we have a society that says graze all the time. It's fine. But
Well,
I mean, look more than 100 years ago, nobody grazed,
I know. I know. I
right?
I I know. Well, I always like to say I love vintage clothes, and sometimes you'll hear these ridiculous things where it's like, "Well, Lucille Ball was a size 12 in the '50s," and it's like, "Yeah, but a size 12 in the
Yeah, do you know what that
'50s
looked like?
is like a size 4 now."
I
So,
know.
or maybe even a size 0 now. I mean, because especially with women's clothing, uh they just keep changing the sizing, I think, so women feel skinnier. I think it's so screwed up, but I know, for example, if I'm buying something vintage, the size does not matter.
No,
Doesn't matter at all. It's all about measurements. But it definitely shows this evolution of people getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And I just, here's what dismays me, that here in the US, I don't know about Canada, but here in the US, if you have a food addiction and you become so obese that you're unable to work, it's considered a disability. And I'm going to get some hate for this. And you are given full disability. And whether it's state, federal, or both, you are able to claim disability because you're obese instead of getting help for a food addiction. And the excuse is, well, we need food to live.
well, I
Uh,
hope people get both. I mean, if someone
yeah.
has a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction or something that, isn't as socially acceptable as being food addicted, um, then we have more sympathy, not sympathy, but I mean, well, first of all, there's more blame going on.
I
And
don't think they call it food addiction. That's why I love that you said something. I don't
yeah,
think they
no,
call it that.
there's some really good work being done these days on food addiction. Vera Tubman, I believe her name is. She's out of Toronto. She's an expert on food addiction. And yeah,
That's
more grazing, less activity.
yeah, Michael says, yeah, working from home
Too
has
close to
contributed
the
me.
refrigerator.
Yes.
It's that,
Yes.
what do they call it? The COVID-19, the
Yeah.
19 pounds, right?
The
That everyone,
freshman 15 when you were in
there's the
college, but
freshman 15, there's the COVID-19.
it's the
Yeah. Yeah. And
COVID-19.
I mean, I hear you. I had the COVID-8 and I had to work to get rid of it. It's
I
gone
worked from
now.
home before COVID, so
Yeah.
it didn't matter as much. But I will say, I want to add to what you said about the chocolate and dopamine, or just sugar and dopamine. I used to love to have a little piece of dark chocolate at night. Like that would be my last snack of the night. I loved it, and it would just be a square, so
Mhm.
it was very minimal, whatever. But then I started doing intermittent fasting and more consistently. And I'm not going to do it all the time, but I have been. And part of that was like I'm trying to do the 16-8, which is actually pretty hard for me. Like 12-12 is easy, 14, but 16-8 is hard. But as part of that, I wasn't, I'm not typically eating after 7 o'clock at all. And after 5 days, I no longer crave it at all. And my partner bought my favorite dark chocolate salted with caramel, and he was giving me a bite the other night. I'm like, I don't want it. Like I just don't even crave it anymore. It's not there.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing how little time that took. That took.
Yeah. And you probably weren't addicted, because addiction is a different thing than, and that's what a lot of people really struggle to understand, is that
Yeah.
I like this snack and I have this snack is different than physical addiction. Like
That's
we think
true.
about how a smoker is, or how
That's true.
a drug use person
I
is.
was addicted to Diet Coke, I gotta tell you. I was addicted. Now, but it took me, I wanna say 4 years to quit drinking Diet Coke. In
Yeah.
stages, and I did it in stages. Like it wasn't something that happened overnight. I think it still amazes people who knew me, back in college and in my 20s. But it took a long time, a really long time.
Yeah. I drank Diet Coke for years.
Yeah,
Um, 2 cans a day usually. That was all. But yeah, I needed to have it.
yeah, and it was
So
diet and no
yeah,
shit,
me
and that
too. Oh
diet.
yeah, because I wouldn't eat sugar,
Right, right. So it had to be good for us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Been there.
I know. Well, I want to wrap up. I know this is a quote from someone else, so I'll let you tell us the source and you add an extra word to it. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So tell us where this quote comes from and then your little tweak to it.
Sure. So this is a quote from Michael Pollan, in his book called The Eater's Manifesto, I think it is. And he boils his entire philosophy down to these 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I add the word real, because in the book he talks about food versus food like commercial substance, or
Oh, okay.
manufactured substances. So when
Okay.
you take what they're now referring to as an ultra processed food, which is where you take these commodity crops, you break them chemically down into their base components, like the oil and the carbohydrates, like the sugars and the starches, modified cornstarch, soy protein, those sorts of things. And then you rebuild them into something that kind of looks like food, but is very addictive, is very inflammatory. So he describes food as being real food, something that either comes from an animal or comes out of the ground.
Right.
And those are real foods, right? Something your great grandparents would recognize.
So how do you say
Um,
it?
so I say eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. Animals are not bad. Because we evolved 2.5 million years worth of evolution
I know.
eating animal foods. We were the
We did.
primates that hunted animals, that hunted fat. And because of that, we grew this incredible brain that we all have, which is why the human race is the dominant species on the planet. It's because of our brains. Our digestive system gave up some of its real estate, and we became animal protein, fat-based creatures. And that's what, we have forward-facing eyes. We were predators, we're hunters. We
Yep.
had the ability to use tools, which replaced the big incisors that, everybody says, oh, we don't have teeth like a hunter or, a carnivore. Well, we had tools and we had fire, so yeah, eat real food, not too much, mostly animals and plants, I guess is how I would say it.
So I just have to say this to wrap up. When we take this magnificent machine that nature has crafted with its short but efficient digestive tract, huge brains, sharp forward focused eyes, and upright posture, and feed it chemicalized crap from a factory for decades at a time, it's no wonder that chronic disease, including cancer, develops. So well said. Please, thank you so much if you were watching live, and for the comments, thank you, Raj. Thank you, Dr. Dudley. Thank you, Michael. If you're watching this on YouTube and or Facebook and you want to get in touch with Martha, I highly recommend that you reach out on LinkedIn. And Martha, real quick before you go, can you please share your email address or however you would like people to get in touch with you?
Sure. So I have a website that includes my blog, which is called Hacking Chemo, and links to my book, which is Hacking Chemo: Using Ketogenic Diet, Therapeutic Fasting, and a Kick-Ass Attitude to Power Through Cancer.
What's your
And
website? So people know.
the
I'll throw it up.
website is just my name, Martha Tettenborn, all lowercase.com. And I
Okay.
have a Facebook page called
There we go.
Hacking Chemo as well.
Okay. All right. Martha, thank you so, so much. And again, if you are watching this at a later date, there is Martha's website. I think I spelled it right,
You did?
marthatettenborn.com.
Perfect.
Martha, thank you so much for writing this book and for doing this live interview. And we'll finish here with Dr. Dudley. Thank you. He says, well done, following you both.
Thank
Make,
you.
make sure you guys connect. And
You bet.
Martha, have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much for this. This was great.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.